closely after that. And we are very concerned about certain components of the information sharing schemes that are parts of each of these bills. And Representative Rogers' bill, the CISPA bill, is really the most alarming in terms of how vast it could potentially be in terms of the types of information that the government would be allowed to receive under the name of cybersecurity.
Talk a little bit more about exactly what is in the bill that people should be concerned about.
Sure. So essentially what the bill does is it creates a structure whereby private companies are encouraged to monitor for cyber threat information that goes across their networks and then share that information with the government. It doesn't specify to whom in the government that information should be shared, but the structure of the bill, all likelihood would be that it would be shared primarily with the National Security Agency or another component of the Department of Defense. So we have a number of concerns with something like this bill that creates sort of a vast hole in the privacy law to allow government to receive this kinds of information.
Now, we saw a lot of outrage over SOPA. How does this bill compare?
Well, I think one of the lessons that we learned in the reaction to SOPA and PIPA is that when Congress tries to legislate on things that are going to affect Internet users' experience, the Internet users are going to pay attention. And bills, like Congressman Rogers' bill, the information sharing bills on Congress, definitely could affect in a very serious way the Internet experience. And so, we know people are starting.
Let's return to the stark truth. Brought to you by VoR, ReasonRadioNetwork.com.
Welcome back. I'm joined here with Libertarian presidential candidate Bill Still. Before the break, we were talking about sort of the gold standard issue and how the elites have backed the Austrian economist. Is there anything else you'd like to say about, you were talking, before the break, you were talking about how the Rockefellers brought Ludwig von Mises over here, and they financed the Ludwig von Mises Institute.
No, I think I've pretty much said my piece on that. The Rockefeller Foundation financed von Mises the whole time he was in the United States. And that's the dirty little secret that no Austrian wants to talk about, but it's absolutely true. I got my first inkling of this when, maybe 15 years ago, an 80-year-old lady in California wrote me like a 9-page handwritten letter. And she knew all about this, but then subsequently I lost the letter. But now it's published actually in one of the biographers of Ludwig von Mises, who is essentially a pro von Mises expositor.
And I know that was Ludwig von Mises was Ron Paul's biggest influence. But what do you think are some of the reasons that the media has been hostile to Ron Paul, but would you say is it more because of his foreign policy than economics?
Yeah, well, I think they don't know what to make of the whole gold standard thing. He's all over the place. Sometimes he'll talk about competitive currency. Sometimes he'll go back and to the gold standard, and typically when he talks about the gold standard, he'll make the inane statement, which I have several pieces of video showing. He'll say the Constitution says that only gold and silver can be money, and that is such a gross distortion of what the Constitution has to say. Ron Paul has got to know that's just not the case. I'm just on that ground alone, I can't really respect him. I mean, I respect some of his other ideas, but so what he says is demonstrably false on the monetary situation. And so then when he comes up with some of the things he does on the foreign policy situation, it's no surprise that he's only polling about 20%.
And you also you talk about national sovereignty, and you say that you talk about the New World Order, or what a lot of the elites their kind of dream is a world without borders, and you call it a ironclad international dictatorship, and it's real. But that's another thing is you're either a globalist for open borders or you're for national sovereignty. But another criticism that I have with some libertarians is they kind of want it both ways. On one hand, they denounce the globalists, but then they don't necessarily want to have strong border defense. But you and on your platform, you really have a strong emphasis on that in order to defend our sovereignty against kind of this globalist agenda, you have to have strong defensible borders.
Yeah, absolutely, and this falls in line. You know what the most important concept in the U.S. Constitution is, and yet it's never mentioned in the document itself. It's the separation of powers concept. The Founding Fathers knew that consolidated power was a bad thing. They also knew that as political systems developed, the tendency would always be, because it was driven, bankers are always going to try to buy up politics, the tendency would always be that government would move towards higher and higher levels of consolidation of power. So they set up this system where they tried to separate power to the greatest possible extent so that there would be competing powers. People would fight over power. And that's a good thing. That competition has to be maintained. That's the essence of an incentive-driven society as well. So what would happen if national sovereignty was completely erased? Well, as Lord Acton put it in the 1800s in England, absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. My contention is that once national borders are erased and this new world order comes into being, nothing can take place but an ironclad world dictatorship. So it is, in fact, national sovereignty is the bulwark of world freedom. So if you accept that premise that we have to maintain national sovereignty, how in the world can you maintain national sovereignty, number one, if your national government is borrowing money from bankers, and number two, if you have an open borders policy? Those two things are the absolute two most important factors of national sovereignty.
And I mean, the thing is, the elites they want the massive underclass. It is, I mean, you look at the immigration issue. It is class warfare, which is being waged by the ultra wealthy against the middle class and working class, because they don't just depresses wages, and then you have a situation like you have in places like Latin America where there's no middle class left. It's just all ultra wealthy and the ultra poor.
Well, that's right. That's how they maximize their profits, and that's really what the march of human civilization over the past 100 years has been all about. It's empowering the middle class, getting rid of serfdom, which means that people work for an honest wage, work for a wage where they can raise a family, where they aren't always in poverty and misery. And that's what really the definition of civilization. And they're trying to reverse the last 1,000 years of this progress, and they've done a great job in just the last generation.
And I mean, if you poll people, most people are against this. Obviously, it's the big powerful special interests are behind it, but I don't know really. You don't really see a strong enough opposition. And I think that's really the best way to phrase it, that it is class war. Because some of the opponents of illegal immigration are on the right side, but they don't make the right arguments.
Right, and so that's what I'm trying to do. It's just to sharpen the argument within the Libertarian Party, and that's really the best I think I can do right at this time and place this year.
And the other issue which ties in with the national sovereignty is the trade deficit. And you say it's inexcusable for the United States to support slave labor through our trade policies. And you would apply tariffs to keep American manufacturing competitive?
Well, in fact, the tariffs are constitutional. They're the only two ways mentioned in the Constitution that the U.S. government is supposed to fund itself is through tariffs and excise taxes. And, of course, excise taxes, the consumption tax, the fair tax would fall under the category of excise taxes. And then tariffs, which we've pretty much done away with. But at the start of the 1900s, for example, 90% of the U.S. government was funded through tariffs and excise taxes. And then, the income tax came in 1913. That was supposed to be only 1% to begin with. But, of course, we all know what happened. It turns out to be this monster that now, it's a direct tax, which the Constitution, the Supreme Court ruled was unconstitutional in the late 1800s. And so that's why they had to pass an amendment to the Constitution to make the income tax constitutional, because the Constitution is quite clearly opposed to any form of direct taxation, and the income tax is clearly that. So it's unconstitutional in the original intent, and it was only through the passage of the 16th Amendment, which many people say was actually never completely ratified, but beyond that. So anyway, that's why they got through the 16th Amendment, and that's the story.
So those two things, definitely the consumption tax and the tariff. So how much revenue would that bring in compared to what the current income tax brings in?
Well, between let's see, what do we need to fund the government right now? They're running at about $4.5 trillion, I believe. So we could probably cut $1 trillion off of that, and between the consumption tax and tariffs, completely fund government without any form of debt. And the way it would have to be would be, look, whatever income we have this year, that's what you get to spend, and you don't get to spend any more unless you raise taxes. But the problem is that when government can borrow money, then it makes it very easy to overspend, because you don't have to, repay the borrowing anytime soon. So it kicks the can down the road. But if there was no government borrowing, then politicians would have to feel the immediate heat of immediately raising taxes. And so that would be a natural modifying effect on spending.
And do you have an estimate by about what % would you cut government spending?
I don't really have that reduced to a percentage figure. We just ran some rough numbers, and we never went back and ran a percentage. It would be significant, though.
But I guess could you list what government agencies would you cut or abolish?
Well, first of all, under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, government should not be doing things that were not specified as a power granted to Congress in the first place. So if it's not granted to Congress in the Constitution, then the states that power devolves to the state governments, and if they don't want it, then it devolves to we the people. So there are a lot of things that government spends money on that are not mentioned in the Constitution. Defending the nation is, of course, mentioned, but things like the Department of Education, that should totally be sent back to the states. Very controversial issues such as abortion, decriminalization of marijuana, all that stuff should be sent back to the state legislatures, because then there would really be no debate. I mean, if you didn't like the abortion policies of New York, you could move over to Connecticut, where the abortion policies would be different. It would be on a state-by-state basis, and that would be a very good thing.
And with individual liberties right now, what are some of the biggest bills out? I think it's called the Defense Authorization Act is the one which would try American citizens in military tribunals.
That is just incredible. When I first heard that this had passed, I wasn't that concerned about it, because I went, well, either I'm hearing this wrong, or if it is right, then certainly, Congress will repeal this.